The night was particularly dark as I drove down the deserted road, with the trees around me seeming to close in, creating an endless tunnel. The windshield wipers struggled against the relentless rain, and each sweep amplified the sense that something was wrong. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, a pair of headlights glowing persistently in the distance. My heart beat in sync with the raindrops, and a part of me wanted to believe it was just any other car. Yet, the nagging feeling of being watched told me otherwise. Every turn I made was perfectly mirrored by the car behind me, and my stomach churned with growing paranoia. The music playing on the radio had faded into insignificant background noise as my mind went into high alert. I forced myself to take deep breaths, trying to calm my nerves. It's just a coincidence, I told myself. But the doubt lingered like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but every time my eyes wandered to the mirror, the headlights were there, like ghosts chasing me. I decided to speed up a bit, hoping the distance between us would increase, and I could finally prove to myself that all this was just some wild fantasy. However, the car behind me also sped up, maintaining its position, and fear began to creep into my veins like poison. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, realizing I'd been driving for hours without a break. It was enough to make anyone start imagining things, right? Still, the sense of impending danger wouldn't subside. That's when I spotted a gas station up ahead, its neon lights flickering like a beacon of hope. I decided to stop there, maybe grab a coffee and calm my nerves. Logic said that in a well-lit place with other people around, any potential stalker would think twice before doing anything. Plus, I needed a break to reassess the situation. With a shaky sigh, I signaled right, pulling into the station, hoping it would bring some momentary peace. As I parked, my eyes couldn't help but dart to the rearview mirror. The car followed me, stopping on the other side of the station, and my throat instantly went dry. I tried not to think the worst, but the stories I'd heard about people disappearing on the road began to dance in my mind. I turned off the engine, feeling a chill run down my spine. I stepped out of the car with the sensation of being watched, like a spectator in a scene about to unfold. Whatever had been following me was about to reveal itself. The moment I entered the convenience store, the smell of cheap coffee and fried food enveloped me, offering a small comfort amid the tension. I glanced around, noticing an elderly man sitting near the entrance, his sharp eyes watching me with interest. The cashier behind the counter was absorbed in his phone, barely lifting his eyes to acknowledge my presence. I walked over to the coffee machine, trying to appear calm while my hands trembled slightly. I needed to pull myself together before deciding on the next step. The old man greeted me politely, his raspy voice making a casual comment about the rainy weather. There was something in the way he observed me that made me feel exposed, as if he knew more than he let on. I felt an inexplicable urge to share my fear with him, hoping that maybe it was just paranoia playing tricks on me. When I mentioned the car that had been following me, his eyes gleamed with genuine concern, but also something more. A silent understanding of a truth I had yet to grasp. He began to tell stories of people who had passed through that very station and were never seen again. His tone was calm, but there was a dark undertone to his words that sent chills down my spine. For a moment, I wished I hadn't said anything, but it was too late to turn back. The old man seemed to know something about the car outside, as if he'd seen it before, but he wasn't willing to reveal everything. His gaze told me I needed to be cautious, but his mouth only formed an enigmatic smile, as if the story was still unfolding. The cashier, oblivious to what was happening, was more of an obstacle than a help. I asked for information about the area, but he mumbled something unimportant, his attention glued to his phone. I couldn't tell if he was truly indifferent or just pretending. The old man watched me closely, as if trying to gauge my reaction to the chaos he had planted in my mind. Everything felt surreal, but the presence of the car outside kept the fear alarmingly real. Gathering my courage, I decided I couldn't stay there forever. The rain was still pouring outside, and the gas station, which I had hoped would be a temporary refuge, was becoming more and more like a prison. With every passing second, the car seemed more like an imminent threat. I needed to decide. Trust the old man with his eerie stories or follow my instinct and leave before it was too late. The night was far from over, and I found myself on the brink of something I couldn't explain but also couldn't ignore. I hesitated at the exit of the gas station, my heart pounding as I kept the suspicious car in the corner of my eye. The old man was closer now, his presence more unsettling than reassuring. His last story still echoed in my head, about someone who had disappeared a few months ago. I could feel his eyes on me, but I couldn't tell if he was trying to protect me or just observing for his own purposes. When he began to speak again, each word seemed to hold me captive as if under a spell. He told me about the nights when the missing people had passed through here, each one following a pattern similar to mine. It seemed absurd, but something in his tone made me believe he truly believed every word he was saying. In a low, calm voice, he suggested that the car outside might be the same one that had appeared before. My mind was in turmoil, trying to decide if this was a trap or a genuine warning. A part of me wanted to believe it was all just a coincidence, but the other was growing more frightened. The rain pounded on the station's roof, creating a sinister symphony that seemed to mark each beat of my heart. Fear began to turn into desperation as I contemplated my options. Logic told me to leave, but the feeling that something horrible was about to happen kept my feet firmly planted. The old man seemed to notice my hesitation, leaning slightly forward as if he was about to share a dark secret. Every word he spoke was a clue, a piece of a puzzle I couldn't fully put together. Finally, I decided I couldn't continue like this, standing there paralyzed. The feeling of being trapped in a cycle of despair was overwhelming, and I knew I had to make a decision. The presence of the suspicious car was still palpable, as if its headlights were eyes fixed on me. I decided the best way out of this situation was to act as if nothing was wrong. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of calm, and began walking toward the exit. As I reached the door, the old man gave me one last look, a mix of warning and understanding. His eyes seemed to whisper, "Be careful," and I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't yet understand. The cashier finally lifted his eyes from his phone, but his gaze was distant, as if nothing really affected him. I opened the door and was greeted by the cold, damp night air. I was about to find out if the danger was real, or if I had created a monster in my mind. Stepping out of the station, I forced myself to walk confidently to the car, despite the fear that made me tremble. The suspicious car was parked on the other side, its presence now more threatening than before. My mind was on high alert, every sound amplified by the growing tension. The old man watched me through the window, his figure a shadow in the fluorescent glow. I felt like he knew more about what was happening than he was willing to admit. When I reached the car, a wave of relief hit me briefly, but the fear quickly returned. There was no one in sight in the suspect vehicle, but I knew someone was there, watching, waiting. I unlocked the door and quickly got inside, locking everything behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to plan my next move. If the old man was right, I couldn't stay there long without making a decision. I started the engine, and the sound of the car roared like thunder in the tense silence of the night. My mind raced with scenarios of what could happen, each one more terrifying than the last. I needed a strategy, something that would allow me to escape whatever was following me. I glanced again at the suspect car, its presence a constant reminder of the danger. The feeling of being hunted was quickly becoming unbearable. The old man had spoken of chases and disappearances, and that kept echoing in my mind. I needed to uncover the truth, but that meant facing what was out there. Every part of me wanted to run, but another part, the more rational part, wanted to confront the situation and end this madness. I knew I had to decide between fight or flight, and time was running out. Finally, I took a deep breath and prepared to confront reality. I needed to know if all this was a game of my mind, or if I was truly in danger. I made the decision to move forward, to find out if there was a dangerous connection I needed to break. With renewed determination, I shifted into gear and began to drive out of the station, determined to find answers to all the questions that haunted me. As I pulled away from the station, a sense of unease grew within me. The suspicious car was back in my rearview mirror, following me closely and mirroring my every move. My hands trembled slightly on the wheel as my mind filled with terrifying scenarios of what could happen. One thing was clear, this driver wasn't just following me out of curiosity. There was a malicious intent in their pursuit, a shadow I couldn't ignore. I needed to find out their true intentions before it was too late. With each passing mile, the weight of the night seemed to grow heavier, and the car remained relentless in its pursuit. I decided I needed to confront this threat head-on before fear took over completely. I knew the road ahead led to a more isolated area where I could pull over without drawing unwanted attention. My hope was to discover who was behind the wheel and what their intentions were. With my heart in my throat, I turned onto a side road and began looking for a safe place to face the pursuer. I found a clearing where I could stop without feeling completely exposed. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I turned off the engine and waited, watching the car slowly approach. The headlights illuminated the darkness around, casting ghostly shadows that danced among the trees. My mind raced with possibilities of what could happen. Finally, the car stopped a few meters away, and the driver slowly got out. I took a deep breath, prepared to face the unknown. The man who approached looked ordinary, but his eyes carried a chilling coldness that made me involuntarily step back. He smiled, but there was no warmth in the gesture. The tension was palpable, and I knew I needed to stay calm. He began to speak, and his words were laced with malice. He admitted to following me purely for the thrill, taking pleasure in the fear he caused. Every word he spoke was like poison, seeping into my mind as I struggled to maintain control. The revelation of his malicious intent was shocking, but it also ignited a spark of determination within me. I couldn't let him continue with his sick games. I had to find a way out of this terrible situation. As he stepped closer, a part of me refused to give in to despair. I needed a plan, something that would turn the tables in my favor. With my heart racing, I realized I was facing a battle for my own survival. The tension was thick as I confronted the driver, the threat in his eyes growing clearer. My mind raced as I tried to formulate a plan to escape. He seemed to relish in my fear, taking slow, deliberate steps toward me. I needed to act quickly before he decided to move from words to action. Looking around, I realized the only way out was to confront him directly. The time for hesitation had passed. With renewed courage, I made a move he didn't expect. I pretended to be willing to listen to what he had to say, stepping a little closer so he would lower his guard. When he leaned in to whisper something disturbing, I took the opportunity and shoved him with all my strength. He lost his balance for a moment, just enough for me to run back to my car. My mind screamed not to waste time. Every second counted. I started the car and sped off, the sound of the engine breaking the silence of the night. The man quickly recovered, but I was already in motion, fighting the urge to look back. The road unfurled before me like a promise of safety. My adrenaline was at its peak, but a part of me felt a strange calm. I knew I couldn't let him catch up to me again. I needed to stay focused and find a way to escape this nightmare. As I put distance between us, I realized the danger wasn't over yet. His car was back in my rearview mirror, a relentless predator in the darkness. He tried to force me off the road, his determination disturbing. But now I was ready to fight. I concentrated on driving, using every curve and every shadow to my advantage, determined to shake him off. I was no longer the easy prey he thought he'd found. Finally, in a tight curve, I made a risky decision. I drove my car onto a side road I knew well, a shortcut he likely wouldn't expect. The maneuver was risky, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that his car was no longer in sight. Relief flooded me, but I knew I had to keep going until I was truly safe. The night still surrounded me, but now with a renewed sense of hope. The experience had been terrifying, but I was alive and determined never to underestimate my instincts again. Despite escaping the immediate danger, my mind couldn't find peace. Doubts haunted me like shadows dancing at the edge of my consciousness. Why had that man chosen me? Was I just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was there something more? The old man's stories and his warnings still echoed in my thoughts, leaving me wondering if he knew more than he was saying. As I drove along the road, now illuminated by dawn, the reality that I had faced a true predator clashed with the idea that the world was a darker place than I had ever imagined. Was this just an isolated encounter? Or had I inadvertently stepped into a much more dangerous game than I could comprehend? The line between paranoia and reality continued to taunt me, and I knew these questions would linger, a constant reminder that sometimes danger lurks where we least expect it. I've worked at this gas station for over 20 years. The solitude of the night shift has always brought me a sense of peace, a refuge from the voices and commotion of the day. Just me, my cat Quello, and the occasional rumble of a car passing on the deserted road. The yellowish light of the fluorescent lamps flickered, casting distorted shadows on the walls. But I was used to this scene. As I stood behind the counter, shuffling through papers, my mind drifted to the night I found that strange key. It was a few years ago, during a routine cleanup in the station's yard. I was rummaging through a secluded corner when my eyes caught something glinting under the flashlight. It was an old key, large, made of heavy iron with a peculiar inscription engraved on its surface. Since then it had been stored in a drawer in my office, almost forgotten. But something about tonight made me remember it, an unsettling feeling that left my mind restless. All this time, I felt as if that key held a deep secret, a mystery buried under the weight of years. I had no idea where it came from or what it was for, but there was something about its presence that always intrigued me. Sometimes, I wondered if I should just throw it away, rid myself of that inexplicable burden. Yet every time I reached that conclusion, something stopped me. It was as if a part of me knew the key had a purpose to fulfill. The sound of the night winds whistling outside added a layer of tension to the already grim atmosphere. A shiver ran down my spine, as if I were being watched by invisible eyes. I looked at the clock and realized it was already past midnight. With a sigh, I decided to check the pumps and make sure everything was in order. Outside, the darkness seemed thicker than usual, enveloping the station in a shroud of mystery. Before returning to the office, I took one last look around. Everything seemed in order, but the feeling of unease persisted. Inside, Coelho was curled up in his bed, indifferent to my thoughts. Some secrets should stay buried, I thought. But what if they insist on coming to light? With that phrase echoing in my mind, I returned to the office, unaware that the night had only just begun. The station door opened with a sound of bells breaking the silence, and my heart skipped a beat. A man entered, wearing a heavy coat that made him almost indistinguishable from the shadows outside. His eyes quickly scanned the room before locking onto me. "Good evening," he said, with a smile that didn't seem to reach his eyes. "I'm a bit lost around here. Is this place always so deserted?" I nodded, trying to appear calm, while inside, my instincts warned me to be cautious. The stranger introduced himself as Mr. Elias, and continued to speak casually, but there was something unsettling in his tone. He asked trivial questions about the area, but soon the conversation took a more specific turn. "Have you ever found anything peculiar around here? I've heard this station has a long history," he commented, as if it were nothing. My heart raced. Could he possibly know about the key? I feigned disinterest, but the alarm inside me had already gone off. "No, not that I know of," I lied, trying to steer the conversation away. However, he seemed determined, his eyes probing the surroundings as if searching for something only he knew was there. "Well, if you find anything, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know," he said with an enigmatic smile before leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. As soon as the door closed behind him, I felt the air around me lighten a bit, but the sensation of being watched lingered. The night continued quietly after his departure, but the presence of the stranger hovered like an invisible shadow. I tried to focus on other tasks, but my mind kept returning to that man and his mysterious words. Why would he be interested in something I barely considered important? Was it a coincidence, or did he know more than he let on? With these thoughts swirling in my head, I took one last look outside, trying to calm my nerves. By the end of my shift, I had no doubt that Mr. Elias represented something more than just a lost traveler. The key now seemed to weigh more in my pocket, as if it were waiting for something imminent. I resolved that I needed to find out more about him and the station's history. Perhaps the key was at the center of a mystery bigger than I could imagine. The night hadn't been like the others, and deep down, I knew that changes were coming. The following days brought restless nights, and Elias became a constant presence in my thoughts. Every time the station door opened, I expected to see his face emerge from the shadows. And, as if answering a silent call, he appeared again. This time, his approach was more direct. "I hope you don't find me intrusive, but I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation," he said, as he settled at the counter like an old acquaintance. I tried to maintain a calm facade, but my heart raced with every word he spoke. Elias began talking about his uncle, who, according to him, worked here many years ago. "He disappeared without a trace," he explained, his voice laden with a sorrow that seemed genuine. "All he left was a clue, something only someone familiar with this place could understand." The revelation gave new meaning to the key I had found, connecting it to a mystery I never knew existed. I sensed that Elias was looking for more than just a simple key. There was something deeper, something he wasn't willing to fully reveal. However, his determination made me realize that I was at the center of a story I didn't fully understand. I decided I needed to know more, not just to protect myself, but also to understand what was truly at stake. Could this be the key to unlocking dark secrets guarded by time? The next night brought more than silence. Something hung in the air, a palpable tension that made every sound seem louder. I took advantage of a moment of calm to explore the station's old files, searching for any reference to the past mentioned by Elias. To my surprise, I found an old, yellowed record describing an employee who worked here in the 1970s, mentioned only as John S. The name sounded familiar, but the record was brief, lacking relevant details. With that discovery in mind, my determination grew. I knew there was something I needed to uncover, something that could change everything I knew about the station and the key. As I closed the file, a shadow crossed the window, but when I looked outside, there was nothing but the wind rustling the trees. Even so, I felt the time was running out and that the key was closer to fulfilling its true purpose. With that certainty, I decided I needed to be even more cautious with Elias and his intentions. The discovery of the old record brought more questions than answers. I couldn't stop thinking about John S. and how he might be related to the unfolding mystery. The next night, Elias returned, with the same determination as always, but now there was a new intensity in his eyes. "Did you find anything?" he asked, almost as if he knew I was searching. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to reveal part of the truth. "I found an old record. Something about a man named John S.," I replied, carefully observing his reaction. For a brief second, I saw a spark of recognition in his eyes, but he quickly masked any emotion. "John was my uncle," Elias admitted, his voice tinged with the honesty that had previously eluded me. "He left something here, something that can correct past mistakes, but I need the key to find out what it is." With the revelation, the pieces began to fit together, albeit in a hazy way. Elias needed the key to open some kind of vault or hideaway left by his uncle. But why had his uncle disappeared? What was so important that had been kept hidden for so long? The question swirled in my mind as I pondered whether or not to give Elias the key. He seemed sincere, but the presence of something so mysterious made me hesitate. What I knew was that the key represented more than just a simple metal object. It was a link to the past, loaded with secrets that perhaps should never be revealed. However, Elias's insistence on seeking it indicated that something important was at stake. Maybe it was time to discover the truth, even if it meant facing risks I wasn't prepared to handle. The decision hung over me like a shadow, heavy and inevitable. As I looked at the station, I felt a deep connection to the place and its secrets. Would I be able to hand over the key, and with it, the mystery that kept the station alive in my mind? Or should I protect what was left of this secret and accept the consequences of such a choice? That night, I knew I had a decision to make, and that time was running out. The night was darker than usual, with a storm brewing on the horizon. I was at the station, mentally reviewing everything I had discovered. The sound of distant thunder made Coelho, my faithful cat, curl up in a corner. I knew Elias wouldn't take long to show up again, and the air seemed charged with something inevitable. When he finally arrived, his presence seemed larger, as if the urgency of his mission had transformed him. Elias entered the station, drenched from the rain but without a trace of hesitation. His eyes met mine, and I could see that he was determined to get the key at any cost. "We need to resolve this, Marta," he declared, in a tone that mixed desperation and determination. The storm outside reflected the turbulence of the moment. I knew the confrontation was inevitable, and that I needed to quickly decide whether I trusted him or not. The wind howled fiercely, as if the world itself were conspiring to heighten the tension between us. "You know the key can change everything," he insisted, his voice almost drowned out by the thunder. "It's the only way to uncover the truth about what really happened to my uncle." His words echoed in my mind as I pondered what I should do. I felt torn between the desire to help and the fear of the unknown. Finally, I took a deep breath and made my decision. "I'll give you the key," I said, pulling the metal object from my pocket. "But I need to know exactly what you plan to do with it." Handing it over was harder than I had imagined. The key seemed to pulse with its own weight, laden with the secrets of decades past. Elias took it carefully, thanking me with a nod, but his words made it clear that he was still reluctant to reveal everything. With the key in hand, Elias prepared to leave. "I promise you'll know the truth soon," he said, his voice fading into the sound of the rain. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mix of relief and regret. I knew that while the station seemed quieter now, the story was far from resolved. The key had left my hands, but the feeling that something big was about to happen remained. And for a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. After Elias's departure, the station returned to its usual silence, but inside me, nothing was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a trail of moisture in the air and a trail of uncertainties in my mind. What would really happen now that Elias had the key? Had I made the right choice in trusting him? These questions swirled in my mind as I tried to find a sense of normality in my daily routine. However, I knew that something had changed irrevocably. The days passed indistinctly, with few developments beyond the local news. However, my instincts told me this was just the prelude to something bigger, and I was right. One morning when I opened the gas station's mailbox, I found a letter. There was no return address, but the postmark from a distant city indicated it had come from far away. Inside, a sheet with just one sentence: "The key is only the beginning." My heart raced as I realized Elias had found a way to communicate. The message left me with more questions than answers, but it also awakened an insatiable curiosity. What did he mean by only the beginning? Had the key I gave him revealed something even he couldn't foresee? I knew I needed to find out what was happening. Perhaps this was an invitation to get even more involved in the plot he had set in motion. Was I capable of unraveling what was behind those enigmatic words? I decided I couldn't just stand by, waiting for answers. I needed to understand what the key had revealed and how it would affect not only Elias but also me in the station. I began making plans to visit the city where the letter had come from. I felt that Elias had left enough clues for me to move forward. And despite the fear of the unknown, there was also a renewed sense of purpose. As the sun began to set, casting long, dancing shadows across the station, I knew I was at the start of a new journey. The mystery of the key, now deeper than ever, continued to call to me. And with the promise of answers and new discoveries, I prepared to follow the path Elias had indicated, ready to face whatever awaited me. The gas station, which had once been a place of monotony, was now the starting point for something much larger. After Elias's departure, the station returned to its usual silence, but inside me, nothing was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a trail of moisture in the air and a trail of uncertainties in my mind. What would really happen now that Elias had the key? Had I made the right choice in trusting him? These questions swirled in my mind as I tried to find a sense of normality in my daily routine. However, I knew that something had changed irrevocably. The days passed indistinctly, and I tried to focus on my daily tasks, but an unsettling feeling lingered. The morning after the storm, I turned on the TV to catch up on the local news while preparing my coffee. I nearly dropped my mug when I heard Elias's name on the screen. A man was found dead on the outskirts of town, the reporter announced. Elias's image, with his intense eyes and enigmatic words, filled the screen, and the news hit me like a punch to the gut. The reporter continued, detailing that Elias's body had been found under mysterious circumstances, with marks suggesting he hadn't died of natural causes. The police were treating the case as suspicious, and my mind spun with the revelation. What had happened after he left the station with the key? And more importantly, how was this connected to the mystery he had drawn me into? I felt a wave of fear as I realized I might be in danger. Still processing the news, I went to the gas station's mailbox, expecting to find only bills and flyers. However, among the ordinary mail, there was a letter with no return address, marked with a red seal I didn't recognize. I opened the letter with trembling hands, and my heart raced as I read the short, threatening message. "You shouldn't have given the key, Marta. Now you're marked too." The words echoed in my mind, each letter carrying the weight of a veiled threat. The letter was a clear warning that I was involved in something much bigger than I'd imagined. Fear gripped me, but also a renewed determination to uncover the truth. Elias was dead, but the mystery hadn't died with him. I picked up the phone and considered calling the police, but hesitated. Who was behind this threat, and what did it mean to be marked? As night fell, I looked around the gas station that had been my home and refuge for so many years. A place that once offered security and predictability was now just a reminder of the secrets and dangers I couldn't fully comprehend. I felt that the key had unearthed something that should have remained hidden. The wind whispered through the trees, and the feeling of being watched made me shiver. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I decided it was time to leave that place behind. The looming threat and the loss of Elias weighed too heavily on my soul. With one last look at the station, I began packing, determined to seek a new beginning elsewhere, far from the shadows hanging over that old establishment. It was time to start over, and find the peace I so desperately longed for. Driving down the deserted road, I felt the exhaustion of a long journey. The headlights cut through the darkness as I thought about the trip that seemed never-ending. There was something lonely and unsettling about that endless road, just me and my thoughts. The radio played softly, but even the music couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. As the clock on the dashboard ticked slowly forward, I longed to be home. The fuel gauge was dangerously low when I spotted the flickering sign of an old gas station. Reluctantly, I slowed down and decided to stop. The place looked almost abandoned, but it was my only option for refueling. The sign made strange noises as it swayed in the wind, as if trying to warn me of something. I looked around, searching for any sign of life, but there was no one in sight. I stepped out of the car, feeling the cold night air. The silence was almost palpable, interrupted only by the distant sound of insects. I entered the convenience store, where I was greeted by a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Bob. He welcomed me with a friendly smile, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. I shook my head, trying to push away the feeling of discomfort as I headed toward the counter. I filled up the car, but when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. I tried again, but the engine was dead, which only added to my frustration. The darkness of the night closed in around me, and the silence returned. A chill ran down my spine as I felt as if I were being watched, but I saw no one around. The sense of vulnerability washed over me as I tried to figure out what to do next. I went back into the store, where Bob was leaning against the counter, absently watching an old television. He offered to check the car for me, but the thought of staying there any longer made me uneasy. However, refusing his help wasn't a practical option, so I reluctantly agreed. While he gathered tools, I looked around the disorganized shelves and expired products, reinforcing my impression that the place was on the verge of being abandoned. Bob approached the car, and began inspecting the engine while I stood by, trying not to appear anxious. The wind blew strongly, bringing a chill that made me hug my body for warmth. I glanced at the empty road, hoping a car would pass by, but the night was completely deserted. "Looks like the battery's dead," Bob said with a look that was both indifferent and helpful. He mentioned that the tow truck wouldn't be available for a few hours, which left me with no options. As Bob worked, I decided to explore the store in search of a snack or a hot drink. The shelves were covered in dust. There were no signs of maintenance, and the place seemed frozen in time. The dim light flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I tried to ignore my instincts. I headed to the drink section, but a low, muffled voice caught my attention. Glancing discreetly over my shoulder, I saw Bob on the phone, speaking in a tone that sounded conspiratorial. "Yes, she's here. I'll keep her around until you arrive," he said, and my heart raced. The idea that he was talking about me put me on high alert. I tried to calm my thoughts, but the sense of impending danger was hard to ignore. The tension in the store grew as I searched for something to distract my mind. I found a chocolate bar, but my hand trembled as I reached for it on the shelf. I needed a plan, and fast. Though I was exhausted, I couldn't just sit passively and wait for something to happen. I decided to stay alert and find some way to communicate with the outside world, as my phone signal was unavailable. When I returned to the car, Bob approached with a smile that seemed innocent, but now I was on edge. He suggested I wait inside the store while he took care of some things outside. I agreed, but my mind was racing. I knew I had to stay calm and think of a way out of this situation. The night was just beginning, and the feeling that something sinister was approaching was growing stronger. Bob was now outside, apparently tending to something around the station. My heart was still racing from the suspicious conversation I had overheard. The store felt increasingly oppressive, with its flickering lights and disorganized environment. I needed to find a way to get out of there, but I didn't know whom to trust. I tried using my phone again, but there was still no signal. Frustration mixed with fear, and I began to feel the urgency of the situation. Without being able to call for help or alert someone to where I was, I started searching the store for something that might help me. The disabled security cameras reinforced my feeling that this place was a trap. I needed to get out of there before something worse happened. As I walked through the store, I began hearing noises coming from outside. I looked out the window toward the forest surrounding the station, noticing shadows moving among the trees. The idea of being watched by someone, or something, gave me chills. The forest seemed to hide dark secrets, and my imagination began to work against me. Bob returned, pretending everything was normal, but I could sense there was more behind his expression. When I confronted him about the wait time for the tow truck, Bob gave a vague answer which only heightened my suspicions. The night seemed never-ending, and I needed to think fast. As we talked, something in Bob's eyes told me he knew more than he was letting on. I needed to keep my cool and act as if I knew nothing. My survival depended on it. I decided I needed to find a way to fix the car myself, or at least distance myself from the gas station. My mind was filled with ideas about what might be happening there, and none of them were good. I wondered if I was overestimating the danger, but I couldn't take the risk. Bob's words on the phone echoed in my mind as I searched for a solution. The sense of danger was intense and time was running out. I knew it was time to act. If I wanted to get out of there, I needed a solid, quick plan. I looked again at the car, trying to think of a way to get the engine running. I grabbed a flashlight from the store and approached the vehicle, pretending to check something in the trunk. As I did so, I tried to recall any mechanical trick that might get the car started again. All I needed was a spark of hope. As I pretended to inspect the car, Bob appeared at my side, watching closely. He asked if I needed help, but his offer felt more like a threat than a solution. The tension between us was evident, and I knew I needed to act before he became hostile. With a nervous smile, I thanked him and said I thought I had found the problem. He stepped back, but not without casting a suspicious look. I decided that confronting him directly might be my only chance to find out the truth. With my heart in my throat, I asked about the phone call I had overheard, trying to catch any sign of nervousness in his reaction. Bob hesitated for a second but quickly regained his composure, claiming it was just a routine call to his superiors. I wasn't convinced, but he seemed satisfied with his rehearsed response. With the car still inoperative, I needed to think of another solution. As I moved away from Bob, I noticed a fire extinguisher hanging on the store wall. I discreetly grabbed it, planning to use it as a weapon if necessary. If I couldn't fix the car, I would need to defend myself. Time was running out, and I knew I couldn't keep waiting for help that would never come. The dark night enveloped me as I tried to stay calm and think rationally. I felt I was running out of options, and that time was slipping away. The shadows in the trees seemed to be closing in, and my survival instincts were on high alert. I needed to find a way out of there, fast. As I prepared for a possible escape, I hoped my intuition was wrong about Bob. But something told me the danger was very real and very close. The sense of urgency heightened when I saw headlights approaching on the road. A black car pulled up next to the station, and 4 men got out. My heart pounded. They walked toward Bob, who seemed to be expecting them. I heard the muffled sound of their voices as they talked, and I realized time was truly running out. I needed to get out of there, but I knew that any wrong move could be my last. Watching from the window, I saw Bob point in my direction as he spoke to the men. My heart nearly stopped. There was no more time for hesitation. I gripped the fire extinguisher tightly, ready to use it. I needed to fix the car or flee into the forest, but there was no guarantee of safety in either option. As I thought about a plan, the store door opened and one of the men walked in, looking around. I tried to stay calm as he scanned the place. His threatening presence filled the store with almost unbearable tension. I needed to act fast. I decided to confront him, pretending confidence and trying to buy time. I asked in a defiant tone what they wanted from me. He laughed, as if my attempt to seem brave was pathetic. I glanced around, searching for an escape route, but the only way out was through the door he was blocking. With adrenaline coursing through me, I decided to strike. I squeezed the fire extinguisher and sprayed the chemical foam in his direction. I used his confusion to run past him, making my way to the car. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of quick footsteps. With trembling hands, I tried once more to start the engine, praying that this time it would work. The seconds seemed to drag on as I turned the key in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life. Without wasting a moment, I hit the gas and sped away from the station as fast as I could, not daring to look back. The men's black car began to follow me, and I knew I had to lose them. The road seemed endless, and the danger was closing in. I felt panic rising, but I couldn't let it take over. I drove the car toward a side road, hoping to escape once and for all. The pursuer's headlights were still visible in the rearview mirror as I sped down the road. Every turn felt like a trap, and the adrenaline kept me on high alert. I focused on finding the exit I knew well. I remembered a side road that could take me to town, and I decided to take the risk. I couldn't let them catch me, and the only way to ensure that was to completely lose them. The tension grew as the road narrowed. The men's headlights still chased me, but I managed to gain a little distance. I took a deep breath and tried to stay focused. Finally, I saw the entrance to the side road and made a sharp turn, veering off the main path. The road was lined with trees, making it harder for my pursuers to see. I kept driving, not slowing down, until I could no longer see the headlights. I reached the town, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. I went straight to the police station and reported everything that had happened. The officers listened attentively, but when they arrived at the gas station, they found nothing suspicious. The security cameras had never worked, and Bob and the other men were nowhere to be seen. The frustration of not having concrete proof left me uneasy, but I was determined not to let this go unnoticed. I tried to resume my normal life, but the feeling of insecurity followed me at every step. The night at the gas station was etched in my mind, and I found myself replaying every detail, wondering how I could have acted differently. The questions wouldn't stop. Who were those men? What did they want with me? What had I narrowly escaped from? The rain drummed softly on the windshield as Daniel drove in silence down the deserted road. The sound of the wipers was the only thing breaking the tense silence between us. I stared out the window, lost in thoughts about everything that had happened in the past few months. This trip was a desperate attempt to fix something that seemed irreparably broken in our relationship. Hope and skepticism battled within me, mirrored by the dark, melancholy landscape outside. As the car moved forward on the wet road, I began to feel that we were heading towards something inevitable. The sense that something was about to happen was palpable, but I didn't know if it was good or bad. We were both exhausted, physically and emotionally, and the weight of unspoken words filled the air. When Daniel finally broke the silence, asking if I was okay, his voice sounded distant and strange. I nodded, but I wasn't sure if everything was really all right. We spotted a brightly lit gas station in the distance, its lights flickering in the darkness like a lonely beacon. Daniel suggested that we stop to refuel and rest a bit before continuing. I agreed, knowing we needed a break from the tiring journey. As we parked the car, I watched the convenience store next to it, its windows fogged by the rain, giving the place a ghostly appearance. There was something unsettling about that isolated station, but I tried to ignore it. As soon as we stepped out of the car, I felt a chill run down my spine, an inexplicable sense of discomfort. Daniel walked toward the gas pump while I followed, looking around with instinctive caution. The station felt even more silent than the deserted road, as if it were waiting for something. When we entered the convenience store, the atmosphere enveloped us with a sense of claustrophobia, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. I felt a pang of alertness, but I wasn't sure why. The moment we stepped inside, I noticed a hooded figure standing in front of the counter. The clerk seemed nervous, exchanging quick, anxious glances with us. The presence of the hooded man brought immediate tension to the air, and Daniel and I exchanged a quick, worried look. Something was very wrong, and my instincts screamed for us to leave as quickly as possible. But fate had other plans for us that dark and stormy night. Before we could react, the hooded man turned to us, holding a gun that glinted under the cold store lights. Daniel raised his hand slowly, trying to show that we weren't a threat, while my heart raced. The silence in the store became deafening, and the feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I knew we were in a situation far more dangerous than any marital crisis we had faced so far. The robber wasted no time ordering us to stand by the counter, keeping us under surveillance while the clerk continued to tremble visibly. His voice was firm and relentless, each word an implicit promise of violence if we didn't cooperate. As we obeyed, I noticed another man at the back of the store, a young guy who seemed nervous and hesitant. He must have been an accomplice, clearly less experienced, and his nervousness seemed like a potential weakness. As the tension unfolded, I watched Daniel closely, his expression a mix of concern and determination. He had always been protective, but now his priority was to keep us safe. The recognition in his eyes as he looked at the robber intrigued me, but I was too focused on assessing our situation to question it. My own emotions were a mess, oscillating between fear and a fierce determination to get out of there. We needed to stay calm and think of a way out. The robber was in control, dictating orders, while the young accomplice hesitated in his actions, suggesting a split in loyalties. I felt that the guy could be an exploitable weakness, someone who could be swayed, but I needed to find a way to reach him without alerting the leader. At the same time, my mind kept returning to Daniel, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. The unrevealed secrets were becoming almost as threatening as the robbery itself. The night was far from over, and I knew we would have to navigate the treacherous waters of secrets and threats carefully. The tension in the air was almost tangible, and as I looked around the store, a part of me hoped this was all just a nightmare from which we would soon wake. But reality was unforgiving, and the only way to escape would be to find a way to overcome not only the thieves, but also the demons already dwelling among us. As the robber kept the gun trained on us, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The situation was tense, and the silence between us spoke louder than any words. It was as if Daniel and I were in a world apart, where our personal problems were insignificant in the face of the imminent danger. Yet, I noticed something strange in the way the leader of the robbery looked at Daniel. It was as if he recognized him from somewhere, and the heavy silence in the store only deepened my apprehension. The revelation came quickly and cruelly when the leader finally spoke, looking directly at Daniel. "Daniel, is it really you? I never thought we'd meet again, especially like this." My heart sank as I realized that Daniel had some sort of dark past that I had completely been unaware of. The man smiled, a smile devoid of warmth, and made a comment about unfinished business. The threat was clear. He knew Daniel, and there was something sinister between them. I felt betrayed and scared, as if the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. The atmosphere in the store grew even more tense. Daniel, who had seemed calm until then, began to sweat, and his expression hardened. He tried to reason with the man, but his voice was laced with barely concealed desperation. "Jack, this isn't necessary," Daniel said, revealing the leader's name. I couldn't believe Daniel had been involved with people like this. Meanwhile, the accomplice, the young guy who seemed nervous, watched us from a distance. There was something fragile about him, and I saw a potential opportunity. I decided that I needed to take action. I began talking to the accomplice, trying to show him that he didn't have to follow Jack's orders. "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to sound confident. He gave me a look filled with uncertainty, and I realized there was a part of him that didn't want to be there. My voice was low but urgent as I tried to convince him that he could get out of this. Jack was distracted, too busy intimidating Daniel, and this was our only chance to turn the tables in our favor. As I spoke to the young man, who we later learned was named Eddie, I felt the gravity of the situation weighing on me. Every word I said was carefully chosen not to alert Jack, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in Eddie. We needed to get out of that store, but we also needed to confront the secrets that lay between us. The tension was unbearable, and the feeling that something big was about to happen only grew. Hope was faint, but I clung to it as if my life depended on it. The tension in the store was almost palpable as I tried to gain Eddie's trust. His hesitation was evident, and I knew it was our best chance. I tried to appeal to his conscience, talking about what he really wanted in life, and whether he was willing to sacrifice his freedom for something so dangerous. His eyes met mine briefly, and I saw a flicker of doubt. I felt I was making progress, but time was running out, and we needed to act fast. Meanwhile, Jack kept his eyes on Daniel. The tension between them was about to explode, and I knew that any wrong move could be disastrous. Daniel tried to stay calm, but it was obvious he was wrestling with his own guilt. It was as if he was reliving old memories he'd rather forget. I began to wonder how long he had been involved with people like this. The feeling of betrayal weighed on me, but I had to focus on the present. Eddie, feeling the pressure, began to question Jack, which didn't go unnoticed. The rift between them was becoming more apparent, and Jack quickly caught on. He turned sharply to Eddie, his face hardening with anger. This gave me the opening I needed. I started talking faster, pushing Eddie to think for himself, and realized that he could do the right thing. He hesitated, and in that moment, I knew he was considering switching sides. As Eddie pondered, the sound of sirens in the distance gave us a momentary glimmer of hope. However, the police car passed by without stopping, a cruel reminder that we were on our own. Jack mocked our fleeting hope, intensifying his pressure on everyone. He made a threatening gesture toward Daniel, making it clear that any resistance would be futile. Despite the frustration, this distraction was enough for Eddie to make a decision. With a determined look, Eddie finally gave in to his conscience. He signaled to me that he was willing to help, but he knew he needed to be discreet. A plan was forming in my mind. Create a big enough distraction so we could disarm Jack. I whispered my plan to Daniel, who nodded slowly. Despite the tensions and the revelations that divided us, we knew it was time to act. The moment to face the danger and seek freedom had finally arrived. The plan was ready to be executed, but everything depended on a perfect moment that seemed never to come. I needed to distract Jack while Daniel and Eddie acted quickly. The tension in my muscles was about to explode when I finally saw my chance. The soda can fell off the shelf, bursting with a loud pop. Everyone turned toward the sound, and I knew that was our signal to move. The distraction was enough to throw Jack off balance. With adrenaline coursing through my body, I moved forward and pushed the nearest shelf, causing a chain reaction of falling products. Jack tried to turn around, but Eddie was already moving, launching himself at Jack in an attempt to disarm him. Daniel, despite his hesitations, quickly joined Eddie, and together they struggled to subdue Jack. I stepped back, watching with a mix of fear and hope as the fight unfolded before me. The struggle was fierce and clumsy, but the element of surprise was on our side. Jack, caught off guard, fought to free himself from Eddie and Daniel's grip. The gun slipped from his hand and skidded across the floor toward me. Without thinking, I grabbed it and pointed it at Jack, my hands trembling visibly. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. Everything stopped for a tense moment, with everyone frozen in place. The heavy, labored breathing was the only thing that filled the stifling air. Jack slowly raised his hands, a look of anger and helplessness on his face. Eddie, still holding Jack firmly, looked at me with something like gratitude mixed with regret. "You don't have to do this, Jack," Daniel said, his voice now more firm and controlled. "Let's end this here." For a brief moment it seemed like everything would resolve peacefully, but I knew the situation was still fragile. We needed to get out of there, and fast. With the gun in my possession, we began to back slowly toward the exit. Eddie followed us, his expression now one of relief and resolve. We left Jack restrained and frustrated, but not before ensuring he couldn't follow us. When we finally crossed the door to freedom, I felt a wave of relief mixed with the weight of the events we still had to face. The night wasn't over yet, but there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. We escaped the gas station, running to the car as the cold night air hit our faces. The feeling of freedom was bittersweet, knowing we had left something behind, but also gained a new perspective on our lives. Daniel was beside me, his heavy breathing indicating both exhaustion and relief. Eddie joined us, determined to find a new path. Jack was left behind, his anger still ringing in my ears, but it was time to move forward. As we started the car, the reality of the situation finally hit me. We were free, but the tension between Daniel and me was still present. He looked at me, his eyes searching for forgiveness and understanding. "Laura, he began, but I raised a hand, asking for silence. "We need to talk, but now is not the time," I replied, my voice soft but firm. The priority was to get out of there and find safety before anything else could be discussed. Eddie, sitting in the back seat, seemed relieved to have made the right decision, but he also knew that his path from here would be complicated. "Thank you for giving me a chance," he said, his voice full of sincerity. I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. The night had transformed us, revealing both the worst and the best in us. There was a long road ahead, but for now we were safe and together, which was more than I could have asked for. As we drove away, I watched the gas station lights disappear in the rearview mirror, a reminder of the chaos we had left behind. The silence in the car was comfortable, a necessary pause after so much turmoil. We knew we would have to face the consequences of our actions and decisions, but we were ready to deal with it together. Daniel and I still had much to discuss, and Eddie needed to figure out his own path, but this experience had united us in a way we had never imagined. As the road stretched out before us, I felt we had a new chance to start over. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still in our hands. The sound of distant sirens faded, leaving only the soft hum of the engine and the steady sound of the rain. I looked at Daniel, and despite everything, I felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, after all this darkness, we could find the light together, step by step.